In this video, we will discuss the structural analysis presented by French anthropologist and ethnologist Claude Lévi-Strauss, who lived from 1908 to 2009, and then apply that structural analysis to the myth, the 10,000 Treasure Mountain. Let's take a moment to remind ourselves about what structuralism is. Structuralism is founded on the idea that the human consciousness is based on underlying structures, and those structures, therefore, are the basis for human action and expression. This, in turn, means that all forms of cultural organization share the same fundamental structures regardless of content. In terms of mythology, that means when we look at myths from all over the world, we will see the same fundamental structures, regardless of the content of those myths. Structural analysis seeks to find those structures. Lévi-Strauss can be tricky to follow, so it's helpful to understand what he was trying to accomplish and what we are trying to accomplish. To Lévi-Strauss, world myths all seemed similar. And he wanted to understand why they were so similar, what they had in common. So as a structuralist, he set out to find the common structure. To do this, he wanted to develop a logical, objective, and scientific approach to the study of myth that avoided subjective and interpretive factors. Now, our goal is to develop a stronger connection to the myth. The analytical practices of Lévi-Strauss help us to see myths in a new light, and they provide the opportunity for an enormous variety of interpretation. We are not engaged in a scientific endeavor, and we are not seeking empirical truth. We will appropriate the basic practices of Lévi-Strauss and use them to develop a more profound relationship with the myths that we are reading. So here is the strategy that Lévi-Strauss employs. First, he identifies myth themes. Myth themes are the fundamental unit of a myth. Let's think of them as a particular event or moment in the story. Then he arranges the myth themes in diachronic order, meaning in time, chronologically, from left to right. This is similar to what we did when we mapped myths. Next, we look for patterns in the myth themes. Then, we rearrange the myth themes in synchronic order, meaning out of time, according to those patterns. And these groupings we call bundles. So we find bundles of myth themes and put them in synchronic order, meaning out of time, not chronological, and we can do this up and down. When Lévi-Strauss looked at these bundles, the structure that he discovered are called binary pairs. The word binary indicates two items that are disparate or opposite. There is tension or conflict between them. So, we try to identify binary pairs with opposites and tensions. Let's talk for a moment about these words diachronic and synchronic. What Lévi-Strauss is showing us is that a myth can exist on two different levels with respect to time. It exists in the temporal plane as a narrative, and it exists atemporally in the way that myth themes relate to each other. A parallel can be found in music. In music, the notes move through time, creating a sense of meter. This is what happens when we read music from left to right, as you see the melody circled in red. But there are also harmonies, and these harmonies exist outside of time. These are the relationships that happen between notes. And this is what happens when we read the music vertically, as circled in blue. The structures that Lévi-Strauss finds, these binary pairs, are in this synchronic, atemporal, or vertical plane. Here's another way to look at this. First, we make a diachronic arrangement of the myth themes, calling them, say, A, B, C, D, E, etc. Then we look for patterns. And we might see a relationship between A, E, I, and J, C, F, and G, etc. Then we rearrange the mythemes in synchronic order by grouping the items that are related, where we see patterns. And here we get bundles of mythemes. Just as we might see how notes relate to each other harmonically, now we can see how mythemes relate to each other and how they form bundles. These might also look to you like the evidence of particular themes, as we called them in an earlier video. What is important here is the relationship between the mythemes, not the individual mythemes themselves. When we organize them this way, we get binary pairs. The groupings all contain opposites. Within each group, there is a tension between polar forces. According to this form of analysis, we will find these binary pairs everywhere we look because they are the underlying structure. These binary pairs are the basic structure of all culture and ways of thought. Another way to say this is that these binary pairs are the universal concerns of all cultures. So human nature is based on these binary pairs, and human existence impels us to resolve these tensions, to reconcile these contradictions. And for Levi-Strauss, that is actually the function of myth. It helps us resolve or mediate these tensions. Let's look at how this works with the 10,000 treasure mountain. First, we're going to isolate the myth themes. Now, we don't need to do every single myth theme in this story. That would be extremely laborious. We want to just get the main pieces. These are individual events. Think of the bricks in the wall, and we want to separate them. So here's what I came up with. Coley helps old man. Coley receives keys. Coley goes to mountain, gains tool. Coley provides. King threatens violence. King takes tool. King destroys tool. King takes one key. Coley locks king in mountain. King trapped in mountain. Coley marries the maiden. Again, I've just isolated the key myth themes so I can see the overall trajectory of the story. Next, I look for patterns. I use my individual perspective to see what I see in common, and I like to use colors to highlight the ones that I see are related to each other. Now, we bundle the ones that have patterns. I took all the reds and put them together, all the purples, all the greens, and all of the browns. Now, within these bundles, we look for binary pairs. We look for opposites. We look for tensions and conflicts between two polar ideas. In the first one, I see a binary opposite of creation versus destruction. In the second one, I see a binary pair of gain versus loss. In the third, freedom versus imprisonment. And in the last, connection versus isolation. These are the binary opposites that we see. These are the structures upon which our thinking and our culture rest, according to structuralist theory. These are the tensions that we must all deal with, that we must all resolve. And that's the point. That the myth can be reduced to binary pairs shows us that there is an underlying structure in myths, or at least we can find one if we look for it. And myths are all similar because they all have this structural similarity. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are not attempting to be entirely objective or scientific. There is a lot of subjectivity involved, particularly in the steps of bundling the myth themes and then seeing the binary pairs. Nor are we trying to prove that all myths actually have an underlying structure. The main idea is to take apart the story and reorganize it in a way that allows us to see with a greater level of depth just what's going on in the story so that we can relate to it.